Tonight, attention centers on a narrow stretch of water that carries enormous weight in the global movement of energy, the Strait of Hormuz, a maritime corridor between the Persian Gulf and the open ocean, a route through which large volumes of the world's oil shipments travel. And now that route has become the focus of a direct declaration from Iran's newly appointed supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. His statement was delivered through Iranian state media, and it arrived at a moment already defined by conflict involving Iran, the United States, and Israel. In those remarks, Mojtaba Khamenei stated that Iran will keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. Before we move forward, take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to support independent, fact-driven reporting. The decision, according to the message broadcast through the country's official channels, is part of Iran's response to the ongoing war with the United States and Israel. That single statement carries immediate implications, because the Strait of Hormuz is not just another body of water on the map. It is one of the most important shipping passages in the global energy system. Oil shipments regularly move through this route. Tankers carrying crude oil pass through the strait on their way to international markets. When that passage is disrupted, the impact travels far beyond the region itself. And that is exactly what has begun to unfold. The closure of the strait has disrupted global energy supplies. Oil shipments moving through the corridor have been affected. The consequences, in practical terms, mean that a shipping route long relied upon for transporting energy resources is no longer operating in its normal capacity. That development comes at the same time as a major leadership change inside Iran, because Mojtaba Khamenei now holds the position previously occupied by his father, Ali Khamenei. The transition occurred after the death of the former supreme leader in a strike. Following that event, Mojtaba Khamenei assumed the role of Iran's highest authority. And in his first public positioning during this phase of conflict, he has tied Iran's military posture directly to the status of the Strait of Hormuz. His remarks included another element. Beyond the closure of the waterway, he vowed continued attacks on enemy assets and regional targets. The language used in the broadcast linked those actions directly to the ongoing confrontation with the United States and Israel. That message was delivered through state media, the official platform used by Iranian leadership to communicate with domestic and international audiences. And so the message travels outward, from Tehran's broadcasting networks, across regional capitals, across global markets, across the maritime routes that connect energy production with energy consumption. The strait itself sits at a geographic choke point, a narrow passage where shipping traffic funnels through limited waters. It has long been recognized as one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. And when that route becomes restricted, the ripple effects begin immediately. Energy traders notice. Shipping companies notice. Governments notice. But the announcement from Iran was not the only response in this unfolding moment. Within hours, there was a reaction from Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a warning directed at Iran's leadership. His statement addressed the leadership in Tehran directly. And alongside that warning, he reaffirmed Israel's ongoing military campaign. Those remarks positioned Israel's response within the broader conflict already underway. So what we have tonight is not a single announcement standing alone. Instead, it sits inside a larger chain of developments. A leadership transition in Iran, a declaration regarding one of the world's most critical shipping routes, a vow of continued attacks, and a warning from Israel's prime minister. All of these elements are unfolding against the backdrop of the war involving Iran, the United States, and Israel. Each element connects to the others. The leadership change sets the stage. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz alters the flow of energy shipments. The military vow defines Iran's posture moving forward, and Israel's response signals that its campaign continues. You can almost feel the weight of the geography involved. A narrow waterway, tankers that normally move steadily through it, and now a declaration that those movements are no longer proceeding as they once did. The consequences are immediate in the world of energy supply, because the disruption of that route directly affects oil shipments. And oil shipments are central to global energy distribution. So when the strait closes, the interruption is not theoretical, it becomes logistical. Tankers cannot move in the same way, supplies are interrupted, and energy markets react to the change. But at the center of this moment remains the voice that delivered the declaration. Mojtaba Khamenei, a newly appointed supreme leader, speaking through state media, framing the closure of the strait as part of Iran's wartime response. It is the first major public stance from the country's new leadership following the death of Ali Khamenei, and it signals a continuation of confrontation rather than a pause. There is a certain gravity in moments like this. A single statement can shift the rhythm of global movement. Ships, energy, diplomatic messages, military warnings, all moving through the same tense atmosphere. And in the broadcast message that carried this announcement, the tone was clear. Iran's leadership intends to maintain the closure. That is the position presented to the world. And alongside it, the vow of continued attacks on enemy assets and regional targets, which means the declaration is not limited to maritime access. It is tied to the broader military dynamic already underway. Sometimes the scale of these developments can feel abstract, but then a sentence lands with quiet clarity, and you realize the moment we are in. As one line might put it tonight, sometimes the narrowest waterway carries the heaviest silence. The Strait of Hormuz, closed by declaration from Iran's new supreme leader, oil shipments disrupted, energy supplies affected, a leadership transition following the death of Ali Khamenei, and a warning from Israel's Prime Minister as the military campaign continues. Those are the facts now shaping this moment, and they form the beginning of a sequence that is still unfolding. The announcement about the Strait of Hormuz did not appear in isolation. It came during a moment of major transition inside Iran's leadership. For decades, the position of supreme leader in Iran was held by Ali Khamenei. His authority defined the structure of power in the country, shaping decisions that carried influence across the region. That long period of leadership ended after his death in a strike. Following that event, Iran entered a new phase. The position of supreme leader passed to Mojtaba Khamenei. The leadership transition placed him at the center of Iran's political and military command during an already active conflict involving Iran, the United States, and Israel. And it was within that context that the declaration about the Strait of Hormuz emerged. In remarks broadcast through Iranian state media, Mojtaba Khamenei presented the closure of the strategic waterway as a direct component of Iran's response to the ongoing war. The message did not stand alone. Alongside the statement about the strait, he also vowed continued attacks on enemy assets and regional targets. That vow formed a central part of the broadcast message. It signaled that the confrontation already underway would continue under the new leadership. For observers around the world, the moment carried multiple layers. A leadership transition following the death of a long-serving supreme leader. A declaration affecting one of the most critical maritime routes in global commerce, and a pledge of further military action. Each element contributes to the broader shape of the current situation, but the Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most immediate points of focus. This waterway serves as a key shipping route connecting the Persian Gulf with international markets. Large volumes of oil shipments move through this corridor on a regular basis. Tankers pass through the strait as part of the system that delivers energy resources from producing countries to buyers across the world. Because of that role, any interruption in the flow through the strait has immediate consequences. When Mojtaba Khamenei stated that Iran will keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, the effect was felt quickly. The closure disrupted global energy supplies. Oil shipments moving through the corridor were affected. Energy distribution relies heavily on predictable maritime routes. When one of those routes is interrupted, the system around it must adjust. Shipping schedules shift. Delivery paths change. Supply chains react to the new conditions. And that reaction travels outward, far beyond the waters where the decision originated. But within Iran's official messaging, the closure was framed as part of the broader military response tied to the war involving the United States and Israel. The remarks delivered through state media presented the measure within that framework. In other words, The decision about the strait was positioned alongside the continuation of military actions against enemy assets and regional targets. Those words were broadcast through official Iranian channels. They were heard across the region, and they were closely watched by governments already involved in the conflict. Among those governments is Israel. Shortly after the remarks from Iran's new supreme leader, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a warning directed toward Iran's leadership. His statement addressed Tehran's leadership directly. At the same time, Netanyahu reaffirmed Israel's ongoing military campaign. That reaffirmation reinforced Israel's position within the conflict already underway. So now there are several connected developments unfolding at once. The leadership transition in Iran, the declaration that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed, the vow of continued attacks against enemy assets and regional targets, and the warning issued by Israel's prime minister. These developments exist within the wider context of the war involving Iran, the United States, and Israel. Each statement carries weight. Each decision shapes the next phase of events. But the geography itself remains central to the current moment. The Strait of Hormuz is not only strategically important, it is physically narrow, a limited passage where maritime traffic moves through constrained waters. That geographic reality has long made it one of the most sensitive shipping routes in the world. When access to that route changes, the consequences spread quickly. The closure announced by Iran affects vessels carrying oil shipments. Those shipments form part of the broader global energy supply. So when the route closes, the disruption reaches beyond national borders. It becomes a matter of international concern. And that is exactly what has occurred following the remarks broadcast through Iranian state media. Energy supplies have been disrupted. Oil shipments have been affected. The practical impact appears in shipping schedules, transport routes, and the overall movement of energy resources. At the same time, the political dimension remains just as important. The leadership transition in Iran is not merely procedural. It represents a shift at the top of the country's governing structure. Mojtaba Khamenei now speaks with the authority of the supreme leader. And the first major declarations associated with his leadership include the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and a vow of continued attacks on enemy assets and regional targets. Those statements are now part of the ongoing narrative surrounding the conflict. Across the region, governments are listening. Across global markets, institutions are measuring the effects of the disrupted energy supply. And across diplomatic channels, messages continue to move between capitals. The warning from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu adds another element to that exchange. His statement directed at Iran's leadership underscores Israel's continued involvement in the military campaign. It places Israel's response alongside the declarations emerging from Tehran. Two leadership voices, two statements directed across the same regional tension. One emphasizing a closure of a critical waterway and continued attacks. The other warning Iran's leadership while reaffirming Israel's military campaign. In moments like this, language carries enormous weight. Every phrase from a national leader is examined closely. Every declaration can shape the environment in which the conflict unfolds. And so the remarks broadcast through Iranian state media have become one of the defining developments of this stage of the conflict. Because those remarks combine three significant elements: a leadership transition, a strategic maritime closure, and a vow of continued military action. Together, they form a message about how Iran's new leadership intends to proceed. At the same time, Israel's response indicates that its own campaign remains in motion, which means the situation continues to develop within the framework of the existing war involving Iran, the United States, and Israel. There is a certain stillness that accompanies moments like this, a pause where the world listens carefully to the words spoken by leaders, because those words can alter the course of events. And sometimes the quiet weight of those words settles in with unusual clarity. You might hear a line like this and feel the moment behind it. History doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives with a sentence declaring that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. A sentence promising continued attacks on enemy assets and regional targets. and a sentence of warning from Israel's Prime Minister as the military campaign continues. Those sentences now define the shape of this moment, and they set the stage for what follows. The developments surrounding the Strait of Hormuz now sit at the center of a tense international moment. A narrow maritime passage, long known for its strategic importance, has become the focal point of a declaration from Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. His statement, delivered through Iranian state media, made clear that Iran will keep the Strait of Hormuz closed as part of its response to the ongoing war involving the United States and Israel. That declaration arrived shortly after the leadership transition in Iran, a transition that followed the death of former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in a strike. With Mojtaba Khamenei now occupying the position of Supreme Leader, the country's leadership structure entered a new phase. And the announcement concerning the Strait of Hormuz became one of the earliest defining actions associated with that transition. In the remarks broadcast through Iranian state media, Mojtaba Khamenei linked the closure of the waterway directly to Iran's wartime posture. The message did not end there. He also vowed continued attacks on enemy assets and regional targets. Those words formed a central part of the communication delivered to audiences through Iran's official broadcasting channels. Taken together, the statements outlined a clear position from Iran's leadership. The Strait of Hormuz would remain closed. Military actions against enemy assets and regional targets would continue. And the declarations were presented within the broader framework of the ongoing war involving Iran, the United States, and Israel. The Strait of Hormuz itself occupies a unique position in global maritime activity. It serves as a key route connecting the Persian Gulf to international waters. Oil shipments regularly pass through this narrow channel on their way to markets around the world. Because of that role, the waterway has long been considered one of the most strategically important shipping corridors in existence. When the strait operates normally, tankers carrying energy resources move through the passage in a steady and predictable flow. But when access to the waterway changes, that flow is interrupted. The closure announced by Iran has had immediate consequences. Global energy supplies have been disrupted. Oil shipments moving through the strait have been affected. Those effects are not limited to the immediate region. Energy distribution networks depend on maritime routes that function consistently. When a central corridor like the Strait of Hormuz becomes restricted, the impact spreads through the broader energy system. Shipments are delayed or redirected. Supply chains adjust to new conditions. And governments closely monitor the situation because of the waterway's role in international commerce. But the significance of this moment extends beyond shipping routes. It also reflects the intersection of military conflict and leadership change. The death of Ali Khamenei created a sudden transition in Iran's highest position of authority. Mojtaba Khamenei's appointment as supreme leader placed him in charge at a time when the country was already engaged in a confrontation involving the United States and Israel. His remarks through state media therefore carry both symbolic and operational meaning. Symbolic because they represent the first public positioning of Iran's new leadership. Operational because they outline the country's actions regarding the Strait of Hormuz and military operations against enemy assets and regional targets. And as those remarks spread through international channels, they prompted a response from Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a warning directed at Iran's leadership. His statement addressed the leadership in Tehran directly. Alongside that warning, Netanyahu reaffirmed Israel's military campaign. The reaffirmation placed Israel's ongoing actions clearly within the framework of the conflict already underway. So the current moment contains several interlocking developments. A leadership transition following the death of Ali Khamenei. A declaration from Mojtaba Khamenei that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. A vow of continued attacks on enemy assets and regional targets. And a warning from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, accompanied by a reaffirmation of Israel's military campaign. Each of these elements is connected to the broader war involving Iran, the United States, and Israel. Each statement forms part of the environment in which the conflict continues to unfold. The Strait of Hormuz remains the most visible symbol of the situation. Its narrow waters have long represented a vital artery in the global movement of oil shipments. Now those waters stand at the center of a declaration that has altered the movement of energy supplies. The closure has disrupted shipments moving through the route. The disruption has affected global energy supplies. And the effects of that disruption continue to ripple outward through the systems that depend on consistent maritime transport. At the same time, the leadership transition in Iran ensures that the announcement carries additional significance. A new supreme leader has assumed authority. And the first major declarations associated with that leadership involve both a strategic maritime closure and a vow of continued attacks against enemy assets and regional targets. Those words now define Iran's publicly stated position during this phase of the war. Across the region, governments continue to follow the developments closely. Across international shipping networks, operators assess the implications of the closed waterway. Across diplomatic channels, messages and responses move between capitals. And at the center of it all is the narrow corridor of water that has become the subject of a national declaration, the Strait of Hormuz, a route where geography and global energy systems intersect. A route now closed by the decision announced through Iranian state media. Moments like this carry a certain quiet intensity, not because of spectacle, but because of the consequences that flow outward from a few carefully chosen words. A leader speaks, a waterway closes, shipments halt or shift, and responses emerge from other governments involved in the same conflict. In those moments, a simple line can capture the weight of the situation. You might hear it expressed like this: sometimes the world changes course at the edge of a narrow channel. Tonight, that channel is the Strait of Hormuz, closed by declaration from Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. A closure tied to the ongoing war involving Iran, the United States, and Israel. A vow of continued attacks on enemy assets and regional targets. And a warning issued by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, alongside the reaffirmation of Israel's military campaign. Those are the developments defining this moment. And with those facts clearly laid out, the script reaches its natural conclusion.